In a previous video, we talked about the reserve clause, which essentially let teams have complete control over the players, and it prevented players from being able to go out and have other teams compete for their services. So, football players were the first to achieve free agency, but they were also the last to take advantage of it. And so this got all the way to the Supreme Court in 1957. The case was Radovich versus the National Football League. And the ruling was football was interstate commerce and subject to antitrust laws. Now, this decision was categorically rejected by the NFL team's right to, or this categorically rejected the NFL team's right to reserve players. Now, at first, NFL team owners responded by entering into an informal gentleman's agreement not to pursue each other's players. Okay, so they all came together and said, look, we're not going to go after your players. All right. But when this broke down in the early 60s, the then Commissioner Pete Roselle unilaterally imposed what is known as the Roselle Rule. And this stated, and I quote, whenever a player becoming a free agent in such a manner thereafter signed a contract with a different club in a league, then, unless mutually satisfactory arrangements have been concluded between the two league teams, the commissioner may name and then award the former club one or more players from an active reserve or selection list. And basically, the Roselle Rule recognized players' right to free agency in theory, but it also killed it in practice by in turn singling a free agent into a trade in which the team had no control over which players it would lose. So basically, it allowed. It said that if a team signed a free agent, all right, so the team signed. So for example, say you have the Yankees and Red Sox. If the Yankees signed a player from the Red Sox, the commissioner could then award a team from the Yankees back to the Red Sox, and they would not be able to choose which player, the Yankees, that is. And so this would prevent the Yankees from, or it would incentivize the Yankees not to sign another team's players, because then they could actually lose one of their own players. Now, this rule essentially survived from, when was it? The 1960s up until 1992. And this was when there was a case that went up to the U.S. District Court that said that this rule violated the antitrust laws. Now, the reserve clause in professional hockey and baseball were both overturned as a result of competition from rival leagues. Okay, so football didn't quite have the same competition that basketball and hockey did. So, in 1972, the World Hockey Association sued the NHL, the National Hockey League, for violating antitrust laws when the NHL tried to block players from jumping from the NHL to the WHA. The resulting ruling struck down the NHL's reserve clause, so they couldn't do this. In the NBA, the players brought an antitrust lawsuit against the league. Oscar Robertson, who was a star player and president of the National Basketball Players Association, sued the league in response to the NBA's attempt to end a costly war with rival American Basketball Association through a partial merger. Now, the NBA was facing a unfavorable court ruling, and so the prospect of continued rivalry with the ABA, the NBA dropped appeal of the Robinson case in '76 and agreed to phase in free agency. In baseball, we talked about this previously, but the Supreme Court repeatedly upheld the monopoly power of baseball teams. Now, the Major League Baseball Players Association was able to overthrow the reserve clause by really outsmarting owners rather than suing them. So prior to 1970, players filed all their grievances with the commissioner, who would typically side with the owners. Okay? The owners pay the commissioner sides with the owners. Now, in the 1970 contract negotiations, the MLBPA executive director got the owners to replace the commissioner with a 3-person panel, with 1 member appointed by the owners, 1 member appointed by the union, and 1 member drawn from a mutually agreed upon list. So this assured that the owners, that the panel would only deal with trivial money matters. So then Commissioner Bowie Kuhn would have the final say in all overachieving matters that affected the integrity of the game. Now, in doing this, they had their challenge to the reserve clause made a financial matter. So basically, they were able to, by having these rules set up, they were able to look at the reserve clause of financial matter. So they were able to force the issue of free agency into the hands of an outside arbitrator who ruled in favor of the players. Okay. Now, this arbitrator was then immediately dismissed by the owners, not surprisingly. So, as I've kind of discussed, free agency was a long path in all the different leagues, and it's not something that was easy, and it's nowhere near what it was today. But today, in all leagues, you have the different teams or the different players who can go out to different teams and, if they want, sell their services to the highest bidders. Whereas before, the power is entirely in the owner's control. So, each sports league can restrict when and how a player becomes a free agent. Most fans who discuss free agencies are typically thinking of unrestricted free agents. An unrestricted free agent is a player who is free to sign with any team that makes him an offer, right, or her. Restricted free agency, on the other hand, these players are free to solicit offers from other teams, but not to sign with them, at least not freely. If a player signs an offer sheet with another team, his original team will have the right of first refusal, which means that that other team can retain the player by matching the other team's offer. Now, to become a restricted free agent, a player must first receive a qualifying offer from the original team, and players who do not receive a qualifying offer immediately become unrestricted free agent. So you have unrestricted free agency and restricted. Now, the NFL in 1993 instituted the franchise tag as a way to limit the movement of free agents. Now, the non-exclusive franchise tag was a case where the player received a 1-year contract that pays him at least the average salary of the 5 highest paid players at his position over the last 5 years, or 120% of the salary in the previous year, whichever was greater. Now, the player could negotiate with other teams, but the team that tags him had the right of first refusal of any offer he receives. If the team chooses not to offer that, it receives 2 additional draft choices. That was the non-exclusive. The exclusive franchise tag has not been used that much, and with the more recently in 2012 for Drew Brees and 2016 for Von Miller. Okay, so it has not been used that much. Now, with a exclusive franchise tag, the player does not have the right to seek offers from other teams, and the team must pay him the average of the top 5 salaries of position in the current year, or 120% of the previous. So that's the exclusive franchise tag. The final kind is the transition tag. Now, this guarantees the player the average of the 10 highest paid players at the position. It's a non-exclusive offer, and the original team receives no compensation if it doesn't match. A team may only tag 1 player per year. If they cancel the tag, they cannot get a different one. Now, a player can refuse the designation and become an unrestricted free agent after sitting out a year. Okay. So the player can say, no, I'm not going to do that, and sit out the year and then become a free agent next year. Now, At first glance, these franchise tag designations seem to favor the players, since it guarantees them one of the highest salaries in the league. However, it can significantly reduce the salaries of the top players. Although the limit is only for 1 year, the chance that a player could be injured or see performance decline means the player's future salary could also be hurt as well. So especially when you're talking about football, where the average NFL player has a relatively short lifespan and injuries can significantly impact their careers, that 1 year contract, if anything happened in there, they could lose a lot of money overall. Another problem is that restricting the salaries of the top players allows the NFL to reduce the pay scale for players throughout the league. So if these are the best players, if they were to go out in the free agency, right, the amount they could get paid could be a lot more than they're going to get with the franchise tag, which is often the case. And this will keep the overall pay levels low. So in general, players have come to resent the franchise tag, and they sometimes threaten to sit out a season rather than accept its limitations. Le'Veon Bell a couple years was one example. He sat out the entire season because the team kept franchising him, putting the franchise tag on him, and he wanted a long-term contract. So he did sit out the season and then got a bigger contract the next year. So Major League Baseball and National Hockey League players can pass through an intermediate stage before agency, known as salary arbitration. Arbitration occurs when the parties to a dispute submit a proposal to an arbitrator, some neutral third party, who then suggests or imposes a resolution. The National Hockey League also has arbitration when they are eligible for restricted free agency. Now, Major League Baseball uses a different process known as the final offer arbitration. Arbitrators cannot impose their own solutions. They must choose one of two submitted to them, which attempts to prevent the parties from becoming addicted to arbitration. So basically what happens is the player and the team both put in two offers, and the arbitrator chooses the one of them. Now, the arbitrators, who are well paid, do not want to jeopardize their employment by appearing prejudiced towards one side or the other. Thus, they tend to have the incentive to try to split the difference. If the two parties recognize the tendency, they have little reason to compromise, and this will lead the arbitrator to impose a less favorable rating or ruling. Now, because each party wants to convince the arbitrator that proposal is the more reasonable one, the two sides must moderate their positions and negotiate with that. The NBA, looking at salary caps. So we talked about salary caps before, and salary caps is a maximum that teams can pay their players. The NBA was the first league to impose a salary cap on its players, and the increase in TV revenues in the sport have allowed salaries to skyrocket. In the more recent contract, the NBA kept its players' share of revenue at 51%, meaning they had to pay 51% of revenue to the players. But there were other forms of revenue that were not included in that. The others have had types of salary caps. The NHL felt strongly about a salary cap that they locked out their players for the entire 2004-2005 season to get that salary cap, and for much of the 2011-13 season it tightened it. Sorry, 2011-2012. So they've had lockouts to keep these salaries caps in place. The reason why they want them is because it stops the players from being able to eat into all the team's profits. Now, the NFL, on the other hand, has a salary cap at 94 for the first time, and they have what's known as a hard cap, which is almost all payments to players count against the cap. Now, the salary cap grants varying shares of revenue depending on the source. For example, with the 2011 CBA, 55% of all national media revenue had to go to the players, 45% to NFL Ventures revenue, 40% of local club revenue, and collectively, the clubs have spent about 95% of the total cap value, and overall, player share must average at least 47% of revenues over the life of the agreement. Baseball is the one sport that does not have salary caps. Now they do have luxury taxes, but if your salary is over a certain amount, but there's nothing stopping teams from going out and signing any player they want at the highest amount they want. And so you do see a lot of disparity between teams when it comes to that. But in general, salary caps are ways for the teams to limit the amount that they have to pay out. So this is just an overall view of free agency and a couple of the other negotiating and contract stipulations that are part of it.